All right, welcome all in for another episode of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast as we continue to power through our preseason previews of the WCC. Today is going to be St. Mary's and Washington State. Obviously, St. Mary's, the reigning WCC champion, Washington State in year 2 of the WCC. We'll get to both of those in just a moment. But Thomas, we're going to start it off with the one seemingly outstanding NCAA case, and that is Tyon Grant Foster, the GCU transfer who went to Gonzaga, still waiting on a waiver one way or the other. Practices have started. We could get into the camp. Grant Foster can't be there yet, and we don't know what we're going to get out of this. It seems like we're a little bit stuck in the dark, but the question here for me is like, how much does this impact Gonzaga's ceiling? And on the flip side, it's like, if he is, how far behind maybe is he going to end up being just because he's not going to be there on the day-to-day?
Yeah, I think to start with the decision process, like if you're Gonzaga, you're running out of time because you have just over a month till the season starts. There's no tomorrow or even gets it within 24 hours of tip-off. If the NCAA decides to rock it like that, I think you look at that and I think you almost have to operate as if you're not going to have him because you haven't had him and you're not going to have him until some arbitrary decision is made. So if I'm the Bulldogs or the Zags, however you want to decide that, because I know there's a big divide amongst characterization there, you just should operate as you are right now. Assume you do not have him because you haven't had him in terms of the status quo. You would have liked to have him. Obviously, big-time transfer you would have liked to bring in, but sometimes it's just not meant to be. And obviously, we understand that the NCAA decisions from yesterday aren't the same ones as today. That won't be the same ones as tomorrow. So that's kind of like my explanation of kind of the decision-making process and how I think Gonzaga should improve. In regards to their actual in-season, I think it really caps their ceiling because when we've had Andy Patton on, like I've talked about, like, I'm not convinced about this team's perimeter shooting. Okay, what's an easy way to alleviate that? Have a guy who can bull his way to the basket. Who's that guy? Tyon Grant Foster. We've seen how much, and I hate to unearth this memory, Zach, but we saw what he did to St. Mary's and going down the lane and getting to the free throw line and all that. Like that will translate to the WCC. So if they don't have him, I think you look at this ceiling, and I think for all the talent, like on paper that Gonzaga has had year over year, I think you're going to have the one where I think talent relative to some of the challengers in the pack, maybe the closest it's ever been. When it's me talking about something like that, and I say, man, Gonzaga is going to be in a dogfight because I just don't know if they're going to have enough juice. I don't know if Graham Ike, Braden Huff can do it all because I think they're going to be the two main focal points. And yes, they have guys like Braden Smith who are very capable and Steele Venters who are very capable, but what the burden of expectation is versus what the reality ends up being without Tyon Grant Foster, I think is really up in the air. And I think when you consider the teams of old, and even just don't know if this team will meet it without Tyon Grant Foster.
Yeah, I think the difference for me is what he brings versus what you look at the rest of that backcourt being at the moment. Like, yes, Braden Smith is going to bring you a lot of positive, a lot of good, what he's going to bring between Jalen Worley, Adam Miller, very specific skill sets and what each of them are going to bring to that backcourt. But Tyon Grant Foster gives you someone who can, as you pointed out, get to the basket essentially whenever he wants. He can create his own shot. And as we've seen the continual evolution of college basketball, you need guys who can do that in clutch situations, in the tougher games. And we know that Gonzaga is going to have a lot of those games in the non-conference. You think about the Kentucky, UCLA, getting Alabama. Like they're going to be tested night in and night out in this non-conference schedule. And for the Zags not having a Grant Foster, I agree. Like limits what we're going to see out of them, and could it really kind of like really put a ceiling on how deep into the tournament they could get. Because you do need somebody who can attack the basket and get his own shot. Because even though like not quite to the same level, but we saw Caleb Babb be able to do that last year before this Gonzaga. And that was something that overall that was the team 2 years ago we thought was missing. That they needed somebody who could attack the basket, get his own shot. And from year to year, the Zags have had kind of like a little bit of a revolving door of who has stepped into that role. And without him, they have fewer options to go to on that front. I do think it's ridiculous that the NCAA has still not made a decision at all at this stage. Like, I know that they get a ton of requests. They have all these things coming in. But at the same time, make a decision. Like, how is it taking you this long? Like, Tyon Grant Foster was off the board really early. This wasn't like it was something that happened in the last month or so. Like, this was a decision made before the summer started. Like, we already knew Tyon Grant Foster was going to be in Spokane a long time ago. The fact that it's dragged on this long is ridiculous. And the fact that a case like this is dragged on, but no offense, the fact that Santa Clara got theirs cleared so quickly with a G League player, which was that like that one got pushed through so fast, and we're still waiting one way or another. I mean, like, if they had decided that no, Grant Foster can't have his 6th season, fine, say it. Don't have us continue to drag this on into the already into open practice. Like, we're already here. And I think that's, if anything, that's the most ridiculous part.
Yeah, it is absolutely ridiculous. And just another day at the office for the NCAA and everything that they accomplish on a day-to-day basis. When you look at kind of like, at least to me, the immediate impact is the gravity that he would have on the floor. You just put so much pressure because he gets downhill. Okay, a center comes up and tries to assist. Oh, who's under the basket but Graham Ike? So you just look at that dynamic of yin and yang and trying to get the Gonzaga offense moving. And while I already had questions about this team with Tyon Grant Foster on the roster, I think they're going to increase almost tenfold now, just because in terms of who are going to be just some of those dudes. Everyone the phrase Zags got dudes, and I think Graham Ike, Braden Huff, no problem. All right, they're very capable guys, very good basketball players, and 2 guys who I think will star and shine throughout the course of the season. But obviously, you got no Nolan Hickman anymore. You got the Nemhards are gone. Rasheer Bolton's been gone. Anton Watson's gone. So many different guys who filled so many different roles, and I don't know that the rest of the sum of the parts can find a way to circumvent all of those roles. They may get some, but I don't think they're going to get all of them. And I think that's going to be the biggest, I guess, immediate setback for when Tyon Grant Foster if he doesn't get the decision that he wants.
Yeah, but we continue to wait on what is going to be happening with Tyon Grant Foster. We're going to jump into our continued roll through each WCC team and start the season previews. And next up is the St. Mary's Gales, the 2-time defending, or I guess 3-time, depending on how you want to do it, WCC regular season champions. The St. Mary's team went 17-1 in WCC play last year. They were a 6th seed in the NCAA tournament. Second round team, beating VC. I'm blanking on
Vandy. Come on, Vandy.
Vandy. Whoa, like the other team that wears black
and starts with a V.
They were the same colors. That's why it threw me off. Of like, they've seen VCU twice. Vandy were like, no, they good chance they see Vandy again in the Battle for Atlantis this year. So we'll see how that goes. But the St. Mary squad reaches the second round. That's kind of been where they've been. That's been the ceiling the last 5 or so years for a team that has been to the NCAA tournament 4 straight years. This is kind of been a period of unprecedented success for the St. Mary's program. You think about where like all the veteran experience, all the guys who've had rolled through, whether it be the Tommy Kuzis, the Logan Johnsons, the Augustus Marshallonis, the Mitchell Saxons, like Alex Dukas, about a lot of really good players roll through this window. And now we're in a situation where St. Mary's is going to look very different. They have all of 1 senior on this team, and they only return 1 starter from this team. This is going to be a very, different look for St. Mary's. They don't have a true point guard. They don't have the veteran leadership we're used to seeing. But we're actually still feeling pretty good about the talent level and what this team is capable of doing. And maybe it is as simple as in Randy Bennett we trust, but the St. Mary's squad, despite some of the challenges that they've had, you look at up and down this roster, Mikey Lewis, Paulius, Murauskas, Harry Wessels, you have a lot of new pieces jumping in. This is still a really good St. Mary's team, and probably, I mean, we're going to get here eventually, is still going to be in the conversation to win the WCC.
Yeah, I think to start with, you definitely know that even with all these questions that we're about to raise, it's not the blind leading the blind. We know Randy Bennett, we know who he is, we know what he's about, and we know what he's going to bring to the table on a year-over-year basis. You mentioned the roster construction. It does give me some pause. I can't lie to you, Zach. Mary's teams, they're very smart, they're very disciplined. Look, they make the right plays at the right time. Kuzi, Logan Johnson, Marshallonis, you mentioned all of them. Is it just going to be forcing Tony Duckett into that peg? Is it going to be Mikey Lewis taking on the burden there? Is Josh Dent? I've heard that name get thrown around quite a lot, but he hasn't played that much. So all of that comes together, and you look at how crucial a point guard is in Randy Bennett's offensive system, and you kind of saw how when teams started trapping Goose last year, how kind of helpless it got at times. Like that is an area where it's gives me pause on paper, but not in terms of the pest defender. So the Kyle Bowens now into Luke Barrett. Now Luke Barrett's gone. Who's going to be the next pest defender? The one that just pisses every opposing offense off. That's the one thing I think they're also going to have to kind of wait and see. Maybe it's Paulius Murauskas, but Murauskas has such a bigger responsibility that I don't know if that's exactly the role for him, considering what he already brings to the table. So I think when you look at St. Mary's, I think there's a lot more questions than in years past, but I do think they have the right architect to figure it out because they've answered those types of questions in the past. I do think that there's obviously a possibility we get some emerging stars that rise to the occasion. And I think you think of other guys like who redshirted last year, Liam Campbell, that maybe he steps up. Is freshman Trent McLean ready? Is Andrew McKeever ready? Does he back up Harry Wessels? How do the two guys get along? Do they run double big once again at a certain point? So I think that you have the right guy in terms of trying to find the solutions. I just don't know. There's a lot more unknown, I think, with St. Mary's this year compared to the last 2 years in quite some time, quite honestly.
And the unknowns, I think, are completely fair because there is a lot. There's even a lot, even with the returners that you think about, the Paulius Murauskas or even a Mikey Lewis coming back, that we know you can clearly see like the potential upside and where Mikey Lewis could go. But with so many unknowns early on, defenses are probably going to change and really focusing on him, taking away him as a three-point shooter. And because this was the St. Mary's squad, if you look at things they did not do well a year ago, or over the last couple of years, they haven't shot the three well. And I don't know if they've necessarily addressed that concern. You looked at their just the shooting percentage as a team. Like, this was not a good three-point shooting team a year ago. This was a team that I think like had number here. They shot 31.9% as a team, which was 9th in the WCC. Now, the one thing that was actually of benefit to an extent, addition by subtraction on the three-point shooting front, that Luke Barrett and Jordan Ross shot a combined 28% from three. So you at least did remove two of your worst three-point shooters. However, that was, obviously there's a lot that both of those brought. So I'm not saying like it's addition by subtraction overall, but in a specific three-point shooting sense, they hopefully are going to be a little bit better. You add a Tony Duckett, that should help their three-point shooting. Hopefully Murauskas has gotten a little bit better himself. But you look at some of the additions that they've also, again, kind of the additions by just going to see a lot of good things out of Liam Campbell. He is supposed to bring that shooting. One guy that just from notes I've started to hear that is going to, one, he's healthy, so I think this is a big part of it, is Rory Hawk. And he has been basically banged up the last couple of years, but there is a lot of good energy and feelings that he could be the guy who slides in as the three on this team. I do think there's going to be a little bit of competition on that front because that's one position that seems at least less solidified than everywhere else. Like I can point to Josh Dent, Tony Duckett, Mikey Lewis, Liam Campbell. Okay, there's my backcourt. But my three is a Dylan Shaw. Is it going to be Rory Hawk? How much are we going to see it be maybe even one of the newcomers, that being Mantis Juzenis coming over from Lithuania? Like there's a few options kind of at every spot for the St. Mary's squad that you kind of have a lot of these unknowns there. I think because really to me, like there's three set in stone. It's Mikey Lewis, Murauskas, and Wessels. Those are like the only three I can say like for sure are going to be in those starting roles. And Harry Wessels, this is someone who I think has just been kind of biding his time for an opportunity. He has sat behind Mitchell Saxon the last 3 years, and he's gotten to learn from one of the best defenders in the WCC, one of St. Mary's best defenders ever, if not the best, depending on how you want to judge that. But Wessels is now going to get the opportunity to be the guy down low. And he still has a lot to learn. We've still seen him make some of those younger big man mistakes even last season. But when you think about the moments he had, like this was the guy who actually was able to shut down Graham Ike. No one shuts down Graham Ike. Harry Wessel just creates an absolute wall in front of him. And we're going to see that a little bit more this year, obviously, because Ike's back, Wessels is back. And you mentioned the double big. I think we're still going to see that because Andrew McKeever brings that still to what St. Mary's is able to do. Last year, we saw them using it with Wessels and Saxon. I don't think there's any reason they can't do the same with Wessels and McKeever. And that does bring up something I did want to show and point out because St. Mary's released the team photo the other day. And for those who cannot see, if you are listening to it, go on to St. Mary's social, look at the website, wherever, and find the team photo because in this photo, you can see the back line, Harry Wessels, Andrew McKeever, and then Jazz Gardner. Wessels is listed at 7'1". Gardner's listed at 7 foot. McKeever's also listed at 7'1". That is not someone who is 7'1". There is a clear 2-3 inch difference between McKeever and the other two. So you talk about size. This St. Mary's team, we know it has it. We know they've utilized it. I'm still very high on this team overall. I know in the last episode I was talking about the schedule and how I'm cringing a little bit about the lack of opportunities that there are. But when I stare at this team and I stare at what they have, are there question marks? Sure. But I get the feeling this team's going to figure it out before we get to the middle of December.
I mean, they get the benefit of the doubt. I don't think you can do anything but give them the benefit of the doubt, given what they've put out the last few years. You mentioned all the conference championship, the tournament champions, eventually making their way to the second round of the NCAA tournament consistently. There's no reason to assume that St. Mary's won't find a way to turn the corner. I just think when you mentioned like those initial questions that you have, I just think there are more this year compared to you've seen in quite some time compared to it. So you mentioned the three, and I mentioned like who's going to be the pest to replace Luke Barrett, who replaced Kyle Bowen. You think just kind of how that kind of shuffles down. Who can be the two-way guy for Alex Dukas? Because I think Paulius Murauskas is going to be a guy who the responsibility could be on him kind of just to make things happen. So I don't think when you look at a guy like, I don't think an Alex Dukas, Paulius Murauskas is a one-to-one, and not even a Kyle Bowen, Luke Barrett is a one-to-one to what Murauskas is going to bring to the table. So I want to kind of see how people kind of coalesce and embrace the opportunity that's coming their way, because I think the one thing you last year, can he stop fouling? Like he's got to be on the floor. And yes, Andrew McKeever may be very capable behind him, but that's not a scenario you want to adventure too far into too often. So like for me, it's a bunch of the little things for me about St. Mary's. Can some guys step up to the plate who we don't know about? Can some guys who maybe we know a little bit about do more? And can the newcomers find a way to be those guys in a Randy Bennett system, a la Tony Duckett? So for me, there's just a lot more small things that I kind of want to wait and see play out before I make a final determination on St. Mary's. But I think you can't argue the fact that they obviously will be in contention for another conference championship. I think inarguably that they'll be in contention for another NCAA tournament. I do think that there's a lot more pause with the schedule, as you mentioned earlier. But I do think they'll find a way to turn the corner. But I do think it may be a little bit more of a bumpy road than people expect. And there's definitely a lot more pieces that haven't been settled in terms of not only how they make up a bench unit person for Randy Bennett and his squad this year.
I think that's the other interesting note of like there's a lot. I feel like we do this in a good number of years with both Randy Bennett and Mark Few teams where you look at the rosters like, oh, these teams are like 9, 10, 11 deep. Neither of these coaches are going to play more than like 7, 8 dudes when we get to March. Like there's a clear-cut line on how many guys will actually play significant minutes for these teams, at least by the end. Yeah, we'll probably see some mix and match early on in November and December as they start to figure these teams out. But we know by the time we get to March, that rotation is going to be real small. So who is in that rotation come it's time for the WCC tournament, time for March Madness, is going to be, I think, very different than what we see right now. I mean, I keep going back, keep thinking about this team because because of the question marks, and the point guard is the one that I'm left kind of thinking about the most because we haven't seen enough of Josh Dent to know if he's going to be the guy who can step in on a regular basis. I don't know if Tony Duckett's going to be that either. I don't know if we're going to see more of Cade Bennett at that spot because of we don't have another true point guard. But the other thing that popped in my head was they may not have a true point guard, but they also didn't have a true point guard when Jordan Ford ran the show. And that is someone who I can more solidly make the case. You know who looks like that? Mikey Lewis. That is maybe the direction you go in an era where you don't have the quote unquote point guard. And yes, like Jordan Ford did have he had Tommy Kuzi next to him for a while. He had Joe Rayhan by his side for a little moment there as well. So it's not like he never had a point guard next to him, but he was the primary. He was the one who ran the show in those last couple of years for St. Mary's. And he wasn't a true point guard. He was a score first point guard. Could he distribute? Yes. But that wasn't what his main goal was. I mean, this is a guy who, had they actually played the NCAA tournament that year, would have become St. Mary's all-time leading scorer. And he was the point guard. So I think that we could see maybe that style play into the season when you don't have a true one, which we're used to seeing with Randy Bennett's system.
Yeah, I think you kind of saw a little bit of a teaser when Mikey Lewis would take some of the point guard dudes over at the WCC tournament and maybe sprinkle it in over the course of the last regular season. You didn't see it a lot, but I think you kind of saw maybe, I don't want to say a trial run, so to speak. I think that was just more out of necessity in terms of what the game was giving them. But when you think of, he's a lankier guy. He's someone who maybe would have a bigger reach in terms of his dribble and trying to get to the basket. How can he find a way to continue to build on maybe not having the ball stripped on like the weak side for example, like that? I'm not saying that's a problem that he will have. I'm just saying in terms of what his makeup is, what the build is, what guys will be doing when they come to crash. Guys are going to be looking for him. It's not going to be, well, we don't really know what we have here and trying to see Mikey Lewis create. Okay, they're going to see that he's had more ample opportunity. He's going to be a guy who is going to be decisive one day. Yes, I do see the vision. I do think there's probably a lot more practical roadblocks compared to what Jordan Ford-esque leaders running the show would be in terms of with Mikey Lewis. But I do think he's capable. I think that's inarguable. But I do think when I look at what St. Mary's is trying to do, and I guess kind of what the Gales envision for what a smart point guard is, and kind of the way the point guard has manifested itself, and like at least maybe in this year's case, it may be more of a combo guard. There's a lot more processing that goes on at the point of attack, and I'm not so sure that this group has that yet. They may, and maybe down the line during the season, it just clicks. But when I look at it right now, I'm like, don't know if there's a guy that's like Tommy Kuzi that can take stock of the floor. Someone like make the right decisions and make sure that the offense is running on schedule. I think there may be a lot more explosiveness at play with guys like Tony Duckett and Mikey Lewis, but I'd look at everything else from play to play. Maybe a little bit slower to start this season.
Well, they'll have plenty of time to kind of start it off slow, not slow, because they do have a really good schedule still kind of lined up in that first part of the non-conference. St. Thomas, Chattanooga, Ohio, South, North Texas. They started off in those first couple weeks. A lot of really solid teams, and then the WCC schedule came out just last week, so starting to stare at that a bit too. And there's always like one really tough stretch, like St. Mary's last year. Then we talked a lot about, there was an 8-game stretch where they basically played the entire top half of the league, and the big question was, how they were going to come out of that. I remember a lot of people say 4-4 out of those 8 games, and they ended up being 7-1, with the one being the 1-point loss at USF. So you think about the St. Mary. You look at St. Mary's this year. Obviously, like time will tell as we start to get a better sense of who this team is. But 6-game stretch, I stared at January 10th to January 31st. Washington State, at USF, at Santa Clara, home for Oregon State. Then they hit the road for Portland, and then they do get a full week to get ready to play in Spokane against Gonzaga for the final WCC meeting between the two in Spokane. So obviously there's going to be a lot of emotion behind that one. But that 6-game stretch is going to, I think, be a very big telling sign of what we should see. We should think of St. Mary's as the rest of WCC play carries on.
You give Randy Bennett a week to prep for Gonzaga. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. That if I'm a Gales fan, that entices me, and that is going to be it's going to be a hard stretch of games, those 6. But I think you look at last year, and you mentioned the proof concept with those 8 games. I do think the back-to-back at San Francisco, at Santa Clara is going to be a difficult one to go 2-0. Again, very capable program to do so. We've seen obviously for years on end that I just think that's more or less what I'm trying to get across. They may go 2-0, but if they go 1-1, it's not the end of the world, and that they can continue to power on. I do think that little stretch towards the end of the season where they should still win all these games, to be quite honest. At Washington State, home against Santa Clara, home against Gonzaga, a pesky 3 games to end the season, and we know that's kind of where St. Mary's is somewhat at their best over the course of a year. So I don't anticipate them dropping many of those games, but they're 2 stretch where they do kind of have to bring, if not but very close to their A game to make sure that they're going to continue to talk about the non-conference schedule having an effect down the road.
Yeah, looking back, I did want to take a look because St. Mary's has the full week to prep for Gonzaga in that one. Gonzaga has the full week to prep for that game too, so that is going to be like true mano a mano, no excuses. You got the full week. Let's do this.
It's time to throw down. Like, you don't want to see Mark Few and Randy Bennett go at it at least a few more times before this is out. And by the way, I don't care who has to make this happen and what administrator has to sign off on this, but these 2 teams better be playing for you. You guys need, quote unquote, need each other, but you should want to be playing each other. Okay, this should be a bar fight game that you guys sign up for one time a year. Once this song and dance is over with.
We'll just do this. We'll just do the 6-year home and home, 3 at Spokane Arena and 3 at Oracle Arena.
Okay,
Oracle. No, Chase Center. Go over to Chase Center.
No, you're going to Oracle. Okay, you've heard it here. St. Mary's fans, obviously, I've been told through the grapevine of what it's like to maybe what type of neutral site you guys get. Obviously, with USF trying to go to Chase. Zach Farmer has officially adopted you guys with Oracle Arena.
Technically, there is no Oracle Arena, so.
Well, it's Oracle to me, damn it.
But that, again, we'll see what happens with that matchup in the future. But that 2 more times, obviously, in conference play, the first one in Spokane, that one's going to be a lot of fun with both teams getting a full week of prep. So that's going to also kind of really heighten up the the excitement, the buildup for that game.
Absolutely.
All
You
right.
know what? You're going. I'm assuming you're going because it feels like it's destiny for you to be there.
So I've already picked out a few spots. We'll see how it goes. I need to make the final arrangements.
Okay.
The Washington State Cougars, David Riley in his second year at Washington State, and this team is in a very different spot than it was, I would say, a year ago. Last year, a lot of familiar faces for Riley on his roster, a lot of guys he brought over from Eastern Washington, and they hit the ground running. They were really good early on. They did lose Cedric Howard after the first 6 games, which really crippled their chances throughout the course of the season. But this was a team that looked like it was a tournament quality team through the first month and a half of the season. And then after injury, the wheels did finally come off during conference play. This is a team, they lost both the matchups to Pacific. They got some early games. They beat USF. They were able to kind of push St. Mary's to the limit up at the Palouse, but it kind of wore on them, just the lack of depth that they had. And going into this year, we know that's going to be kind of a point of emphasis, but also, can they continue with the style of play that David Riley wanted them to have last year? We know they wanted to play up tempo. They want to play fast. And we saw it in year 1, and it worked really well up until the point where they just did not have enough horses to run it. This year, you have some good pieces on this roster. What's your kind of look at this Washington State team as they enter their final year in the WCC?
Yeah, like you mentioned, lots of explosiveness last year, and I think that's not just limited to the limited games you saw Cedric Howard play. Obviously, Lamont Watts, Isaiah Watts at times, and even though a very controversial figure at times, Nate Calmisa sometimes was very capable. But you looked at the downsides of that. You mentioned that where for as good as they played against USF St. Mary's, they got taken to the woodshed at home by Gonzaga, gave up to this day, I think they're still making threes in Santa Clara. That kind of like the variance was so high with Washington State last year. I think the variance will be lower this season for Washington State. But for me, the one thing that I kind of want to see play out, because this was just my initial gut feeling once I saw the roster and kind of how it plays out compared to what David Riley wants. There was explosiveness, but not a lot of mental toughness last year. I wonder if they've course corrected almost too much, and that, yeah, they'll be a tough team and they'll be a tougher out in terms of a play-to-play basis, but they may not be as explosive as they want to be. So that's the one thing. Kind of, I don't want to say growth because they haven't played a game yet, but it's an area that I want to see answered, because you look at guys who they added. Emmanuel Ugbo, very capable guy. You bring back Ndi Okafor, very capable guy. But then you look at the guards, because the guards are the engine of what that up-tempo like offense is. And you have guys you brought back, Tomas Thrasherson, Richard Zvavers, and then you got the guys backing up, and Case Wynot for to bring through. I just don't know if they're going to have the horses in terms of the top end to get to do that effectively. I think they'll have a better floor in terms of they're not going to let the rope go as much as they did last year under those circumstances. But I'm not sure they're going to get what they want in terms of their ceiling, and especially what it looks like in terms of the best version of David Riley basketball.
Yeah, I mean, it does appear that the athleticism which we saw from the team a year ago is not necessarily the athleticism we're going to see from this year's team. The one I think really interesting piece to me is Meli Yalaho. Like, he's the one coming over from Texas Tech that I think has a lot of there's a lot of Lawan Watts, like a potential there. And I think that if he can find his footing and really kind of like figure things out, he's the one I think that can really kind of have that breakout in a David Riley system. Even looking at certain guys like Jerome Morton coming over from Morehead State, this was someone who shot 37% from three, going to get plenty of opportunities to shoot from three in this offense, the way that they run it. So I do think that there's at least there's some optimism that this can work with the pieces that they have. But I do think it has to be a little bit different, because one of the challenges, and Oregon State, I think, course corrected on this as well with their recruit this year, is that they got bigger, they got stronger, and because this is a league where the small mistakes can kill you, that you have to find guys who are going to limit those mistakes, do the little things right, because that a lot of times is how you win in this league. You see that obviously that's what Gonzaga does, in addition to obviously everything else they do really well. St. Mary's does that. USF does that. Santa Clara does that. LMU has gotten better at that. I think they were best in the league in turnovers outside of St. Mary's. Like, they were one of the best in ball control a year ago. So you see like that the teams who do well in this league are those who limit the mistakes, and they also rebound well. They are bigger, and that was something else that Washington State needed to do as well. Like, they were not a terribly big team. Like, the two guys, like Dane Erikstrup and this Ethan Price were two guys, like, obviously two really good bigs, but they were kind of more outside in as opposed to inside out. And that is something that isn't exactly something that works in the long term in the WCC. We don't see too many. You still have to have the guy inside. You still have to have that solid interior presence. And Andy Okafor is one of those guys who can bring that. He needs to be more consistent. He needs to be able to stay on the floor longer to be able to help them with that. But that's part of, I think, what they've had to kind of reconstruct. And with Washington State, this is a team that just feels like they've done some work on that front, but it's still building toward what is going to be ideal in a David Riley system.
Yeah, because you kind of look at it from a certain sense, and I saw a little bit of Dave Riley when he was at Eastern Washington. You kind of see how the vision comes together when Ethan Price was over there, Cedric Howard was over there, and a guy who Washington State won't be getting back this year, but I believe he's back next year, and Casey Jones from his mission trip. Washington State, like the current center, like our big man structures, the stands, it's Andy Okafor, the transfer Simon Hildebrand, and then the freshman Dominic Robinson. I don't think you can really rely on a guy like Dominic Robinson just yet. I think he's a little bit time away. But then you kind of see, is it just going to be Hildebrand backing up at the 5? Is it maybe slide him to the 4, see what he kind of brings to the table? Not so sure kind of how they want to split the dynamics that way. Do they fit Emmanuel Ugbo and just place him at the 4? Like, I find Emmanuel Ugbo to be a very capable player and someone who just needs to continue to be consistent. That's one area where you just don't want to see him go absent. And I think if Washington State can uncork that, I think that'd be a major benefit for them. But when I look at all that, and it's hard for me to kind of understand how this current crop may come together, because I don't know that you have the right mix of explosiveness and athleticism mixed with the right toughness. I think you do. I think they're better in the department of toughness, but I do think they have, at least for the moment, on paper, regressed in the area of explosiveness and the ability to push the pace consistently with the right people. So, like you mentioned, there are guys who are capable of stepping up, but I do think it's important to stress that I think it's a little bit more of an unknown puzzle compared to a team like Oregon State, because you can see the vision. You got guys who are returning, and you kind of can see where they've been developing over the course of the years. Washington State, it's a bunch of young guys from last year that are returning, and aside from Andy Okafor, and now it's trying to see how does it all kind of like peg together in terms of trying to find the best version of David Riley basketball, because he does have a longer runway than a guy like Wayne Tinkle. And I think that's why maybe I'm kind of a little bit more judicious, I guess, so to speak, about what I see from this team, because we've seen the really good parts of it. So that's why maybe they get a higher burden of scrutiny compared to a team like Oregon State.
Yeah, again, in year one, it's also hard because it's like he was able to bring over a lot of his guys, so they all knew the system. They were able to kind of hit the ground running, and it made a lot more sense early on of how they were able to kind of really, it seemed a little bit more seamless the way they were able to do that. This year is different in that way. You don't have that core of guys that are completely familiar with your system, so it's there's, I think, going to be more growing pains this year than there were a year ago. And I mean, not that it's obviously it's not a direct comparison, but there is still in the back of my mind of transition from Eastern Washington to the WCC, because we've seen this once before. We saw this in Portland with what we have with Shante Leggins. Like year one, Portland, when he arrived, was really good. Like he brought over a lot of the guys he had at Eastern. They hit the ground running, and everyone's kind of like, oh, this actually might be something. Portland looks like they might be turning around. And then year two didn't look so great. Year three didn't look so great. It kind of took, and we haven't seen them get back anywhere to where they were that first year. So not to say that obviously that's going to happen here with Washington State, but at the very least, it's something that I just can't get out of my head that, well, we've seen the script once, may not happen again, but there is at least the transition from one league to the next does make a difference. And even though, yes, it's Washington State across the chest, they are still new to this league. That the coach is still new to this league. There's a lot of new still at Washington State, and I think that's something to watch out for in year two with this team.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at, just to wrap it up real quick, you look at the level of competition. You look at the end of the Pac-12, like pound for pound, there are some teams in the WCC who would make noise. Obviously, it goes without saying, Gonzaga, St. Mary's, but USF, Santa Clara, and those last few years, the Pac-12, they can and would have made a difference in certain respects. And you look at the mention of the crest going across. David Riley, step up in competition. Staff, step up in competition. Players, step up in competition. So there's a lot of adjustment period because you don't get any breaks facing St. Mary's or Gonzaga. You don't get caught up like the new kid on the block. If anything, they probably want to beat you more because you were the Pac-12, and now you think, oh, we're going to the WCC, so we're just going to go run this. And then you see, go ask Oregon State, Washington State if they've been running it in basketball. And they, on the women's side, they've been doing good, but on the men's side, a lot more of a struggle. And I think that's one thing you really want to go check, because there will be teams that go make you check yourself. And I think Washington State has to make sure that they can get out the other side of checking themselves, because last year they let go of the rope, and this year I think we'll do a better job at it.
Well, you say not letting go of the rope, but the schedule is maybe where we run into a challenge, because Washington State, they did a really good job of scheduling. They're in the Maui Invitational. They've got a lot of really good non-conference opponents outside of that. And it almost leads me to, as we continue to have the conversation about what this team is and what they could be, did they maybe put themselves in a position that's going to snowball on them more quickly than it may have otherwise? Because looking at it, yes, they start out with Idaho, but then they have Davidson on the road. They bring in St. Thomas. They play Washington, Southern Utah. Then they go to the Maui. They start with Chaminade, but then it's Arizona State or Texas. Then they could end up with NC State or USC, Boise. They have Bradley. They have Nevada, USC. And there's a lot of teams in here that are going to be top 50 teams, and it's going to come at them fast. And this is where I'm almost concerned that this, because they're still learning a system, because they're still trying to figure it out, because they may not have all of the right pieces for what they want to do, that it's going to catch up with them quickly. Where last year they were able to really, like, they really played well early on, and they kept that going because the competition wasn't, I don't think it was as good last year as it was this year. Nevada game aside, but like this was, I look at this non-conference and I just think by the time we get to the Maui, it could be danger zone for the Cougs.
I do think it's important to, I guess, contextualize danger zone in terms of what? Like, if you're saying in terms of NCAA tournament, I don't think they're making the
No, not. And then, like, I don't think we're discussing Washington State as a tournament team.
Yeah. So in that case, I think danger zone, but danger zone, I think to me more kind of reads of, are you going to be better than last year's team? So when, like, and you play Washington, can you find a way to, that's a home game. That's one where you obviously, the fan base and the alumni base wants that game. You can see obviously on the football side, didn't happen, but in basketball side, that's a Washington team that's very gettable. You look at the forgettable season that Danny Sprinkle had last year. Now you can see is Washington good enough? So Washington State and Washington, I think, is a good fork in the road game for them. At Davidson, obviously tough road game for considering the stature of that program. Maui Invitational, obviously punching above their weight in certain respects. At USC, a team where usually Eric Musselman starts to figure it out around this time, and a tough, right after the opening stretch of conference play, they're kind of a murderer's row of games for Washington State, and the one I kind of want to focus on before I kind of wrap up my big picture thoughts about it. Starting January 10th and going through January 18th, and 1 week of games. And you guys at home can let me know if you'd sign up for that. Sounds fun. Let me see, where do I sign? But yeah, no, like that is a very hard stretch of games, and one where it's like, oh my God, you're gonna find out pretty quickly what this Washington State team is made of. And even towards the back half of the season, from February 3rd through February 22nd, at Oregon State, hosting Santa Clara, at Gonzaga, hosting Pacific, then hosting St. Mary's. So another tough stretch of games. So I look at Washington State. For me, danger zone time to me is more towards conference play, because I think we'll know more about them. I think they kind of need to take a punch or two in non-conference play, because you need to find out what this team is. I think last year you could kind of see eventually at a certain point the wheels fell off just because of the injuries and all that. Now you kind of got to see what type of program do you have? What type of culture do you have? I think non-conference will teach us a lot about what Washington State's culture is. I think at conference play, you'll kind of get to see, have I seen what I need to see from the Cougars this year in terms of, can they hold their own, or are they just not going to be competitive in their WCC history?
Yeah, this is going to be a much larger challenge this year than it was last year for Washington State. I do think, we've talked kind of a bit about just how the middle of the WCC, while there are a ton of questions, does seem like the talent level has risen up. And whether that be with Santa Clara, with Oregon State, with LMU, with Seattle joining in, even though the non-conference for Seattle is not to be desired, the talent on the team is something that has obviously raised enough eyebrows that you have to pay attention to what the Red Hawks have done. And this Washington State team, this schedule, I think it's going to provide maybe a few more challenges than I think maybe we wanted initially. I mean, again, like I think if you gave this schedule to last year's team and they did the exact same thing that they did, we would have been talking very much that Washington State is on that bubble, if not on the actual right side of the bubble by the time conference play started. Obviously, like injuries would have taken them out of the equation anyway later on. But at the moment, this is a schedule they could have really done some legit damage and were capable of pulling off. I think it just feels like that this was almost like a year or two late for the schedule.
Yeah, in certain respects, I totally get it. And I think it's hard to project these things knowing how college basketball changes from a year-to-year basis. But I think Washington State, it's a challenge. I personally like scheduling up. I like seeing teams that challenge themselves. Yeah, I like trying to find out what you are through adversity. You look at the schedules of the last 2 years with USF and Santa Clara and how they've continued that momentum. Gonzaga, even though we have raised a lot of questions about them, they're challenged themselves. And that's why we were so hard on St. Mary's. That's why we're hard on Seattle. And that's why when you look at the Washington State schedule, I personally like it because I want to see what they're made of. So yes, it may not be sexy in the win-loss column, and it may be tougher when you look down the road of what you want Washington State basketball to be. But sometimes it's not about what you want, it's what you need. And I think Washington State needs this type of schedule to find out if they have more mental toughness than last year's team.
And you know what? It may actually set themselves up well when, again, you start to think forward about the new Pac-12 and what that's going to look like, and them prepping for a year where they're going to see one of the better basketball conferences in the country when that comes all together. So thinking about the ceiling, thinking about the floor of this team, I mean, the more and more I start to think about this, I'm like, the ceiling to me, I mean, I don't know if I can go any higher than 6th for this team. When I think about the rest of the league and what they have all done to this point, I don't know if Washington State has done enough on paper. Again, it's all on paper right now, but I don't think that they've done enough to make me believe they would finish any higher than that.
Honestly, I think the more pertinent question is what's their floor? Because like we talked about last year, their floor fell out. It just did. Like I'd be curious to see how you kind of visualize that, because we've talked about it so much ad nauseum that this mid pack is going to be so compact. Is their floor maybe a little bit lower just by virtue of what the competition is, and maybe how you kind of see that playing out?
I think we could be looking at like 9 or 10 as the floor for this team. Like again, we're thinking worst case scenario.
Right.
Is this, and because that means worst case scenario is Pacific hits it all. Like they go gangbusters in conference play, and Pacific is actually like legit in the middle of the pack. That assumes San Diego also does what we think they are capable of doing. That means that LMU has done more damage than, maybe not more than, but probably the appropriate amount of damage that we think that LMU is capable of doing. Oregon State has kind of been about where we thought they would be. Santa Clara, same thing. The top three have done what the top three are going to do. It's everybody else has hit on what we thought. If everyone else hits on what we think they're capable of doing on the average, on the aggregate, Washington State could be the one that sees themselves at 8, 9, or 10 in this league.
I'm going to take a different approach, and maybe that's maybe it's misguided based on what I've been saying, but to me, the floor was so ugly last year in terms of how Washington State let the bottom fall out that I don't think it can repeat itself this year. Because I think then you start raising big picture questions of like, do we have the right coaching staff if you see something like that fall again, especially if injuries are not a part of the game like they were last year. For me, I have their range a lot smaller. I have their floor is like 8th again, like not again, but 8th can be that 8th can be the area. I think if you look for their aggression, I think it'll be more in terms of talent than opposed to circumstance. But I look at the floor, I don't think it's dramatically high. I think 5th place is their ceiling in this league. I just think, to me, if they're going to have the bottom fall out, you've already kind of seen it in action with more talented guys. So I think, and you saw they still finished with the 6th seed anyway in the conference tournament. I think going forward, I think Washington State can be better than that. I think their floor talent, despite what may happen, should be a little bit higher than teams like San Diego Pacific. So even while they may hit and be better, I think Washington State can still be just a smidge more successful in that regard. But I just don't think their ceiling's that high compared to relative other scopes of teams. Like we talked about San Diego, your variance was pretty high on them. Mine was also pretty high. But I think, to me, Washington State's a little bit more compact, a little bit more of a known quantity. I just think we just kind of got to figure out what type of toughness this team really has.
Yeah, and obviously time is going to tell what we see with this Washington State team. There's a lot of variance. There's a lot of interesting pieces. It's a matter of how this is all going to coalesce. What's it going to look like in David Riley's system, and how much the schedule really what direction the schedule really takes them in the non-conference. And by the time they get the WCC play, if they can survive that murderer's row there in January, if they can come out the other side floating, I think that then we're probably looking more at the best case scenario for Washington State going into the season.
100%.
All right. So that'll wrap up this episode of the Unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. We will be highlighting 2 more teams in our next episode. And if I wrote this down correctly, we are going to be going over the Portland Pilots and Thomas's Santa Clara Broncos. So we will preview those 2 teams in the next episode. So be sure to hit that subscribe button, follow along on social media at Unofficial WCC Pod. Follow us both on social media at Post by Zach and at Thomas Dunn 24. All right, that'll wrap us up. Thanks a lot, everybody, and we will catch you later.